Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, we learned this week that since the BP oil spill disaster, there have been perhaps thousands of smaller leaks, many going unreported. We'll look tonight at what's up down there. Jefferson Parish President Mike Yenni went to a chamber luncheon this week, but wasn't allowed to speak. And a new program speaks out about community health care. And this the week before Thanksgiving, our Future Watch segment examines regional agriculture in a land of plenty. We'll take a look at that and a new book about Tom Benson. We'll also examine why some folks are wondering if a new name for the Zephyr's baseball team is off track. Those stories are on the table for tonight's Informed Sources with Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV, Channel 4, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Kathy Finn, business journalist and author of the book, Tom Benson, A Billionaire's Journey. We're going to go first on over to David, and you did a series about these oil spills that are happening in the Gulf, not like a BP spill, some smaller, some not so small. And also, you did a story about a young man who alerted authorities to this and really wasn't pleased with the outcome.
Right, yeah, his name was Evan Howington. He worked on offshore rigs. He lives in Houston, and we went to Houston to talk to him. And really remarkable story. The video is that he was able to get because he worked on something called an ROV, which is an unmanned submarine that they send down to look at what's going on down there and to do work down there using robot arms that they control with like a video game almost from the rig. He was controlling that, and he worked with some other folks, and he wasn't actually controlling it at the moment that his bosses said, oh, just go down there and open this valve and we'll see what happens. And of course, they opened this valve. They had been trying to clear out a line and it wasn't working, and they just said, just open it. And of course, what happened was a bunch of chemicals and oil came out, and you could see it clear as day on the video because they have systems video that actually was just crystal clear that we showed, and it was really an amazing video. And then also video that he took using his cell phone of them talking about it, and they're talking about covering it up and talking about how they can record this so that they won't be able to tell what's going on. And it was really quite astounding. And he brought this to the federal government. He knew that this was wrong, and they, went after the oil company, but they didn't really follow through all the way. And what they ended up charging the oil company with was not, to the full extent of what he recorded. And he said that when he saw the charges come out, he didn't even recognize them. He thought maybe it was a separate case involving the same company. So, there are protections for whistleblowers in a lot of industries, dirty industry as they call it, not so for offshore workers, and that's where he really felt that he was let down by the government. So we detailed that, and then that raised the question, how often does this happen? Now, we don't know how often that you have these situations where the spill isn't recorded at all, but we do know that there's actually been 11,700 reported oil spills since the Deepwater Horizon BP spill.
What's the protocol for reporting a spill, though? Can it be something completely minor or all the way up to BP?
Well, it has a range, and it's usually based on sheen that you see at the surface when the oil comes up to the surface. And I've actually reported a spill before, because when you fly offshore, if you see spills, you're supposed to call it into the National Response Center, which is a part of the U.S. Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard keeps data on all of this, and there are environmental groups that have been tracking that data. And it's interesting because the number of spills reported has dropped off. It's down to about 80 in the last month, whereas it had been upwards of 240 per month in the year of 2012.
So we know of these spills that have been reported. There could be other ones that have not been reported. What kind of action then generally is taken on those that are reported? Are all of them addressed?
Well, some of them are small enough that there's not really time to go out there and address it. They get shut off, and it just kind of dissipates into the environment. The industry has spent a lot of money in preparing response units across the Gulf Coast, and say that they're going to be quick to get out there and clean up when you have a big spill that needs cleanup. There was one this spring from Shell Oil that was 90,000 gallons. But none of that compares at all to the 200 million gallons that was spilled by BP. And that's where you saw it just constantly happening over 3 months. Right. And you can't really compare it. Now, Now, the real question is, what's the impact on the environment?
Right.
And, we saw massive destruction to species down the food chain in the BP spill, but that was a really unique situation with so much more and over such a long period of time and right into the coastal marshes.
So when you're talking about spills, how are they occurring? Is it pipeline spills or other sources?
Right, there's multiple sources. You have pipeline spills, you have blowouts, which is where there's a crew working on a well and they lose control of it and it comes up from under the ground and they can't control it, which is what happened with BP and the Deepwater Horizon. You have smaller instances of that we've reported on over the last couple of years that weren't as destructive. You also have things like what Mr. Howington showed in his video, which was they were doing work down there right at the wellhead and they opened a valve. Sometimes it's a mistake. In this case, it was quite deliberate.
So what about now the introduction of fracking? That's another element in exploration and production, and chemicals involved with that.
Right.
Any testing available on that to see what that's doing to the environment?
Well, there's been a real push to look at that on land with shale fracking for natural gas on land. It's been kind of lost in the shuffle that there's fracking chemicals being used offshore as well, and it's been going on for quite some time. In 2014, I did a series about the fact that it was going on out there, and now we see that the EPA is still studying what the effect of those chemicals are, and yet because of public records requests from environmental groups, we've been able to learn that that's happening a lot more often.
And the amazing thing about that is, too, you look at Oklahoma and the earthquakes that have occurred, and they're directly blaming the fracking on land in Oklahoma.
Right.
How can there not be underwater impacts as well?
And there's questions about that, and what that would do with the different type of subsea strata offshore. It's softer. But then the question is, this is a different type of fracking where the chemicals don't go so far out and they don't cause fissures in the structure anyway. So there's questions about whether that would be the case offshore. But what we do know is that the chemicals that they put down there to ease the flow of the oil come back up to the rig, and then they are dumped into the water, in the processed water that they put overboard anyway. They have to meet certain standards of grease and oil in that water under the EPA standards, but there are no standards for those chemicals for the fracking, and that's the real concern.
And there are natural seeps that happen too.
Right, and the industry will tell you natural seeps, they're not harmful, and they're in some cases helpful, and you can't say that it's really any worse with these thousands of smaller oil spills, and that's something that we just don't know the answer to.
Okay, thanks a lot, David. Great reporting too. There's 3 great stories that you did.
Thank
Over
you.
to Kathy right now, and Kathy has something to tell us about Tom Benson, because you've just written a book, A Billionaire's Journey. What did you learn about Mr. Benson and his journey to being a billionaire?
Well, quite a lot, actually. The book, I finished the book several months ago, but it is just out. It's just been released within the last week. And I think I like to tell people some of the things that they don't know about Tom Benson. And one of the main things that a lot of people don't realize about him, even though he has a net worth that I calculate today to be around $2.7 billion, he started from nothing. I mean, he really came from nothing. He grew up in the 7th Ward of New Orleans. He was born in the city, lived in a small house on North Johnson Street that he shared with his parents, of course, and 3 younger brothers. And his father, Tom Benson Sr., supported the family by working at his job at the Gus Meyer department store on Canal Street. They did not have a rich existence. It was pretty hardcore. In addition to that, a lot of people don't realize that even though Tom Benson is known as a car dealer, and before he bought the Saints, that was his main identity as a dealership owner, he's never been a car salesman per se. He has sold very few cars in his lifetime directly. He was hired into the business as a bookkeeper. He was hired at a little dealership on North Rampart Street at the edge of the French Quarter, and that's how he got his start in the business. It really began to take off about a year later when a car dealer from San Antonio who was very successful, his name was Mike Persia, came to New Orleans, expanded into New Orleans by buying that dealership. And it was the beginning of a very close relationship and a mentoring relationship. Persia taught Tom Benson everything there was to know about the business. And Persia really valued Benson right off the bat. He could see that he had extraordinary financial skills and that he had an intuitive business sense that just really worked and and their relationship really clicked, and their two families became very close. So things really took off for Tom when one day Persia asked him if he would go to move to San Antonio and take over management of a dealership that Persia had bought there, and it wasn't doing very well. And Persia told Tom that if you can make this dealership turn a profit, I will finance you to buy an interest in it. You have an ownership interest in it, and even to buy the whole dealership at some point. So all of those things came to pass. Tom moved with his first wife, Shirley, and the two children that they had at that point adopted. They would later adopt a third one, and they moved to San Antonio. Tom took over that dealership and turned it around, and Persia did indeed finance him to buy the dealership, and that single dealership became the basis for Tom's company, Benson Motors, which would go on over the next 20 to 25 years to own more than 24 dealerships in Central Texas and in Louisiana.
Really the story of an extremely skilled businessman, a great business mind.
He just had such an intuitive business sense. And, Tom Benson, then and today, a very plain-spoken man, not sophisticated in the usual senses, not an intellectual at all, but just an extraordinarily good businessman. And he's a very hard-nosed businessman. He's tough. He's extremely tough, mentally, physically, and very hard-nosed in business. Anybody who worked for him really had to toe the line. And people who worked for him have always said he always wanted more. No matter how well you did, Tom always demanded more from you. And those kinds of traits really earned him a lot of money over the years. And he built his business by acquiring more dealerships, doing savvy land deals, and building new dealerships. And within that 25-year period, he came to have a net worth of a few $100 million.
Kathy, from hearing you talk, he's a man who also suffered many personal tragedies with his family, but also had a tradition of being very supportive of his family.
Yes, his mother had taught him from the beginning that, all of the children really, that any success you have in your life, you should share with family members. And Tom really took that message to heart. And throughout his career in the automobile business, he brought in all kinds of relatives. All three of his younger brothers worked in his businesses. His father, at one point, later on, worked in his business. He brought in cousins, nieces, nephews, gave them all jobs, and in some cases gave them ownership positions or their own dealerships. There are two dealerships today out in Jefferson Parish that are owned by Tom's stepdaughters, by his second wife, Grace. Walker Volkswagen and Peak BMW are both owned by stepdaughters of Tom Benson. And he set them up in those businesses. So he was very, very generous in that sense with his businesses.
David?
Did he have a goal to get into sports team ownership earlier, or was that something that kind of came about suddenly?
David, I think that's a very interesting question, because I think Tom Benson never had a particularly deep interest in football. He, by his own admission, he didn't really know anything about the game. I think what attracted him to Major League sports was the opportunity to make a heck of a lot of money with them. The NFL, if you are lucky enough to be able to have the wherewithal to acquire a team and the opportunity to acquire a team, you're going to make a lot of money, because there's a lot of guaranteed income there, and that has just risen steadily over the past 30 years.
So
Benson's
it's just that
been
savvy
running.
business sense continuing.
It's just mining those opportunities.
And of course, with the sports team, he's had his family involved in that. What is the latest, quickly, because we're running out of time on this, but what is the latest now on the lawsuits, family lawsuits?
The last remaining lawsuit is still hanging out there. It's the one that involves his heirs' ownerships in the Saints and Pelicans. There is a trial scheduled in February, but a filing this week indicated that they may be nearing a settlement that would avert the trial. Now, we've been there before, so who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. If there's a trial, I will be there. Okay,
I'm sure you will be. Tom Benson, A Billionaire's Journey. I think that we had the book cover. Do we have the book to show also? We'll try to get that up for you at some point, but there we go. Tom Benson, A Billionaire's Journey, just in time for the holidays. It sounds like a great read. Congrats on that.
Thank you, Marcia.
All right. Let's go over to Dawn right now. And Future Watch, we're talking about Louisiana agriculture.
Yes.
Food on the table.
Food on the table, actually, as we're talking about Thanksgiving, big, or Christmas too, sweet potatoes and pecans, two big crops in Louisiana,
and wonderful
both of
together.
which
Yes.
are dealing with issues related to the August flooding and also bugs. That pecan harvest is smaller than usual. across the state. It's also smaller than usual across the country. Georgia is the largest producer of pecans in our country, and hurricane damage affected the crops in Georgia. Bug and insects, mites, and disease are damaging the crops here, as is the very wet grounds. When the pecans were growing on the trees, the August flooding we experienced across the state really impacted the pecan harvest. The rainy August hurt the sweet potato crop as well. About 30% of the crop statewide was damaged by the heavy rains, and now the dry conditions are making harvest hard. They're actually having to water the crops to be able to harvest the potatoes, and that's both hurting the yield and there isn't as much because of the wet weather conditions. The LSU Ag Center told me today that the fall flooding caused $277 million in damage to Louisiana crops. The biggest damage was to rice and soybeans. And the delays in harvesting are reducing yields and quality across the board. The sugarcane farmers right now are having trouble because it's been so dry. We had that wet August, and then we had the dry October with almost no rain until Election Day time. The rain came, and it's just too dry to be able to, for the new crops going in to grow. The citrus crops, on the other hand, there's pretty good news there. There's an abundant crop that was not affected by the flooding and not affected by the dryness. What we're dealing with in terms of citrus is citrus canker disease, which is in all the parishes that grow citrus. I was not able to talk to anybody, a citrus farmer at all, because they're in the middle of their harvest. They're too busy out in the fields right now to take a phone call from a reporter. But I'm told that the fruit is abundant on the trees, and the trees that are healthy without this citrus canker disease that we've seen for several years now in Louisiana, the fruit is abundant there. Satsumas especially, looking very good. Crawfish, the rains in August could impact it's not crawfish season yet, but a lot of the early crawfish may have been forced by those rains to come up out of their burrows and then get involved in water where that's not good water for them and be wiped out. It's too soon to know how that crop is going to be impacted, but this weird weather, that rainy August and flooding and the dry October are hurting our crops across the board.
So bottom line, when you see in the grocery Louisiana sweet potatoes or
buy them to help
help
those farmers. But pecans also nationwide, I would expect if you're giving pecans as gifts, the price might go up a little bit this year.
There are some crops when it's good for one thing, it's not good for the other. For example, cotton and soybeans. Like if it's a bad year for soybeans, they'll plant cotton. If it's a good year for cotton,
right. And in fact, because it was a bad year for rice, the rice farmers are counting on crawfish, because rice and crawfish can go hand in hand.
But if you want to make a crawfish jambalaya, you need both.
Well, you need both. And the other thing we didn't talk about is strawberries, and strawberries were impacted by spring rains. They haven't gone in the ground yet. The dry topsoil might impact planting, but so far, so good.
Okay, Don, thanks a lot. Right now we're going to talk about a program about healthcare access, how it sort of changed in the city, and it's a program that I, along with my co-producer Paula Pendarvis, put together. It premiered on the station on WYES last night. It'll air again tonight. We're going to reverse roles.
We do
Errol?
a seldom seen trick here.
What are your questions?
In which we'll briefly reverse roles. And actually, in talking about this topic, there's the whole situation of healthcare is getting complex. It used to be you had a few hospitals. Now you're getting more and more satellite-type facilities between urgent care. Oxford's got 2 facilities, which are like urgent care with emergency rooms. I know you're an advocate of community health centers. If you were like queen of healthcare, which way should we go with all these things?
Well, I think in looking at this and talking to the providers, to the administrators, to policymakers, what has happened since that sort of hub, that model of everybody going to charity, particularly for the uninsured, underinsured, anybody really, to go to charity. Charity closed post-Katrina. They started up now with what's called a network of primary care community health centers, where once again anyone can go, uninsured, insured, commercial insurance, and in that are medical homes. A medical home is you get your primary health care, but you also, maybe you might need some behavioral health. There could be dental services. It's all sort of a one-stop shop. It's unlike an urgent care center where you go if you have, an earache or something. The primary care health centers are going to be there with your records. You have your regular providers, and it truly is a medical home, and it can just take care of your whole family. This is what providers are seeing is really getting more and more people to seek their health care. And that's the idea, is to stay out of the emergency room.
Is it
the emergency room is the most
well
expensive.
visits?
Absolutely encourages more well visits. So I would say yes, the healthcare model that is probably working well, from what I'm learning from the healthcare providers, is this patient-centered medical home, and that's what it is. A good experience between provider and the patient.
And there's one on Carrollton Avenue.
Well, there are like 60 of them in the region now, and there are different network providers, such as Daughters of Charity, St. Thomas, Access Health, and they have clinics all over, really now, like 60 in the multi-parish area of metropolitan New Orleans. And then, of course, now we have a state-of-the-art hospital, which replaced old Charity. Now we have the new University Medical Center, which is right now, it's facing its challenges too. It's had, funding issues, et cetera. But it is picking up clientele, as it were, and more inpatient care. Also a mix of patient care, the model of insured and uninsured. Medicaid expansion, and of course commercial insured too. Medicaid expansion has had an impact. Of course, we now don't know where Medicaid expansion is going to be, since the president-elect says he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act. But by and large, the feeling is with these primary care centers, people have much better access to health care than they had before. The patients we talk to really like it. So the program airs again at 10 o'clock this Friday night, and then multiple times over the weekend. You can check the WYES.org webpage to see the times, and then we'll be airing again in January. So, okay, I plugged my program. And with Paula Pendarvis also, Tom Gregory and Lenny Delbert editing, they did a great job. Let's go over to David now and talk about Mike Yenni and the latest what's going on. He went to the chamber meeting, State of the Parish, but he did not speak.
Yeah, and that was expected because the chamber did not want him to speak. They specifically changed the format this year. They were expecting it to kind of be a madhouse if he did speak, I think was part of the concern. They did, before that chamber event, that State of the Parish event, call for him to resign, along with a lot of other leaders in the community, business groups, elected officials have called for him to resign. It's been about a month and a half since I broke the story about the sexually explicit text messages that he sent to a 17-year-old, and he's acknowledged mistakes and what have you, but he hasn't. He's refused to step down, and he's also refused, dozens of requests by me to sit down for an interview and answer specific questions about that. So, the pressure continues, and part of that is this recall effort. And initially, right after he acknowledged the mistakes and sending inappropriate text messages, they collected about 30,000 signatures in the first month, and they need 91,000, which is a third of the registered voters in the parish, to get a referendum question to recall him on a ballot.
So they have till April to get
these signatures. They have till April to get that, and they took off like a shot, but then they were restricted in how close they could be to the polls, and they were really counting on Election Day. Dawn mentioned the rains coming on Election Day. That really hurt their opportunity.
But it continues, and they'll continue to let the community know about this. Meanwhile, he's refusing to step down. He says he can get business done.
That's right.
Okay. All right. I'm going to quickly say the name of my program, Reshaping a Greater New Orleans, Creating Healthy Communities. I forgot about that. Speaking about names, our baseball team has a new name, and people are really scratching their heads.
This is either one of the most brilliant marketing decisions ever, or the very worst. Right? And people trying to figure out the people kind of shocked at the name, the baby cakes, which is
hard to say.
And New Orleans has king cakes, and king cakes have those plastic babies in them, but we've never referred to them as baby cakes. And the people who run, and it's a new group that bought the Zephyrs last year. It's a guy who owns a minor league team out of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And he's hired the guy who's the manager, a guy named Cookie Rojas. He used to be a Major League Baseball player, and they just thought that the team needed a new identity, so they got a marketing firm from San Diego, and they asked people here they asked people to submit ideas, and they just thought that this was a great idea to call it the Baby Cakes. The logo is of a king cake with this really angry-looking baby emerging from the king cake. And if you read their statement, that's supposed to be the look of a New Orleanian who's defiant about the past and really going into the future. And so it's supposed to show the thrust and the ambition in New Orleans.
Is that what they say?
Reading
That's a real name? That's a real explanation?
Yeah.
Defiant
But
New Orleanian.
New Orleanians have always treasured their past.
Well,
and their
the
history.
defiant of the problems we've had. It's a Katrina thing, okay.
I thought it was trying to jump off of the Kincaid baby that rides around on the unicycle at the Hornets and now at the Pelicans games. Like, that's so scary.
It may have been, who knows where it came from. But now think this is a farm club for the Miami Marlins. And so if you're a player in the Major League team, the worst thing you want to hear is that you're being sent down to the minors. Okay, so imagine you're a Major League Baseball player and the guy comes and says, you become a baby cake.
Back
Okay,
to the baby cakes, baby.
where's it go? Now, as bad of a name as that is, it is not the worst name in the Pacific Coast League in which this team plays. The Las Vegas team is called the 51s, which is named after Area 51, where the UFO is supposed to be. The Albuquerque team is called the Isotopes.
Why are those bad names?
Well, to me, they're just kind of weird. I don't know.
Weird,
they are
but
a little
that
weird.
is.
Yeah.
But
at least the baby's a human as opposed to an
Looking at
isotope.
the comments and everything, I have not seen one positive comment other than by the team owners that they like baby
Well,
cakes.
it makes the Pelicans look better. People complained about the Pelicans.
The
when they were
Pelicans
leaving,
doesn't
but
look so
now
bad
it doesn't look
anymore.
bad at
Okay, but
all.
one thing, we are talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. So that is a good marketing ploy. All right, now it's time for us to look ahead.
WWL 89.9 is in the process of buying another frequency, 104.9. And if that is successful, which they think it will be, then by next month they're going to start doing 24-hour classical music, going back to the original roots. If you remember, it was originally all classical. Then it switched to a news format. It'll keep the news format on 89.9 and the 24-hour classical. It's going through the formalities now, but they hope by January to be able to start operating it. It's a low-power frequency. It'll be heard best on the East Bank and on the West Bank, but they also have other ways that you can get it on the North Shore.
All right, David.
My colleague at Channel 4, Mike Perlstein, has done a really powerful series called The New Face of Heroin. I hope everybody gets a chance to see it because he had such a big impact talking to dealers and other people involved in it that actually a junkie came to him and says he wants to tell his story, his family's story. It's going to be on Tuesday night.
Yeah,
and
it's an
gonna be
excellent
very
series.
powerful.
It's just so tragic, Dawn.
A lot happier than that, which is very tragic. The Crew Jingle Parade, downtown New Orleans, December 3rd at 1 o'clock. Get ready to...
Christmas is
Here we go. It's here.
Kathy.
On December 8th, there's an annual meeting of shareholders of First NBC Bank here in New Orleans. First NBC Bank has come under some pressure from federal regulators for problem loans, and I think we'll hear more about what their next step is after that annual meeting.
Okay, and I have to say that we are going to be back in 2 weeks. We won't be here next Friday because starting Thanksgiving at noon is a Downton Abbey marathon, nonstop until Sunday around noon. So Informed Sources will be back in 2 weeks. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a good evening.